What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And we are coming to you after the Cavs' fifth loss of the season. They fell 108-93 to the Indiana Pacers. And Chris, Kenny Atkinson didn't want to make it seem as straightforward as it was, but shooting the lowest three-point percentage of the season and second lowest field goal percentage of the season makes it difficult. And then when you look a little bit deeper into it and say, hey, the Cavs are, I believe, 5-4 in games where they shoot below 35% from the three-point line. That's been their bread and butter, and tonight they just didn't have the stroke falling. Is that what you chalk it up to?
It's interesting, Ethan, because a lot of the guys in the locker room, including Kenny Atkinson, were talking about the defense. They gave up 68 points in the second half to Indiana. They gave up 37 in the third quarter. But to me, their offense completely self-destructed, especially in the third quarter. I mean, for a majority of the third quarter, they were barely getting to 10 points. This is, as much as they want to say it, this has become an offensive-minded team. They are a better offensive team statistically this year than they are a defensive team. And when they don't have it on the offensive end, and it's rare that they don't, but when they don't, they're going to struggle. And 18 points for this offense in the third quarter, that's absurd. 22 points in the fourth quarter for this offense with this depth, with this talent, with this firepower, that's just not good enough. So I totally understand why they're looking at the defense because sometimes shots are going to fall and sometimes they're not. Sometimes you're going to get open looks and you're going to make them, and sometimes you're going to get open looks and you're going to miss them. But there are very few teams in the NBA, the Cavs included, that are going to win a basketball game against a high-level team, an above 500 team that came into Cleveland on a roll, when they shoot 28% and 11% respectively from the field and from three-point range in a second half. It's just really, really difficult for the Cavs or any team to overcome that kind of terrible offense, combined with the fact that they turned the ball over 8 times in the second half, and the Pacers turned those turnovers into 15 points the other way. So to me, this was about their offense self-destructing in the second half.
I agree. And like you mentioned, the turnovers was bad, but I think we have to go back to something that we talked about a lot last year, and that's that third quarter that seems to be lingering again with the Cavs and causing problems for them. In tonight's game, they allowed 37 points in the third quarter. Against the Charlotte Hornets last week, they allowed 30 points in the third quarter. Against the OKC Thunder, they allowed 43 points in the third quarter. And then again, against the Toronto Raptors, they allowed 42 points in the third quarter. And Kenny Atkinson made the joke saying that maybe they need to have better halftime speeches. But to come out into the third quarter, and you mentioned it, the 8 turnovers in the second half, but 7 of those came in the third quarter. And it was also a part to be because of Tyrese Halliburton going out with left hamstring tightness. And they were able, and Rick Carlisle pushed the right button and put in better defenders, and then hounded the Cavs point of attack ball handlers and said, hey, if you're going to get past us, you're going to have to do it against some of our best guys. So, Chris, when it comes to the turnovers and the Cavs not being able to get out of some of the full court presses and allowing 4 backcourt turnovers, which obviously led to 12 points on the opposite end for the Pacers, is that still one of the different kinds of teams that pose problems for the Cavs? It's lengthy, physical, defensive-minded teams that are going to put body on ball, especially when you talk about Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell.
I think it's worth monitoring as this season continues to go on, because I do think that there are issues that the Cavs have at both ends of the floor when you're talking about playing against bigger-sized wings with athleticism, speed, and quickness. It's something that we've talked about on this podcast in the past. Atlanta has a bunch of those guys on their roster. DeAndre Hunter, Jalen Johnson, Bogdanovich is pretty big for his position. Dyson Daniels is really, really long. So the list goes on and on and on there. And then you talk about New York. The Cavs beat the Knicks, but there were some issues that the Knicks gave them because they have OG Anunoby and they have Mikal Bridges and they have Josh Hart. And then you keep going with the Toronto Raptors are long and athletic and quick on the perimeter. They didn't beat the Cavs, but the likes of RJ Barrett, Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly is longer and bigger than you would expect. And I know a lot of people are going to sit here, and there was some conversation in the media room tonight. They're going to say, well, what about Oklahoma City? Like, Oklahoma City is not long. Not as long as some of these other teams that the Cavs have struggled against. Lou Dort's like 6'2" or 6'3". Cason Wallace is 6'2" or 6'3". Jalen Williams is essentially playing power forward for them, and he's 6'5". So those aren't the players that we're talking about here. Look at what Indiana did tonight. Jarris Walker is long and athletic, and he was able to be disruptive. And Ben Shepherd is like 6'6", and some of these Obi Toppin is 6'8", and he's long and he's athletic and he's quick and he provides problems. So I do think it's something to continue to monitor, right? It's hard to say that there's a certain style of team that gives the Cavs problems, or there's a certain kind of roster makeup that the Cavs can't match. Because the conversation all season long with the Cavs is how versatile they are, how diverse they are, how they can win in a multitude of ways, how they have so many different multifaceted players at both ends of the floor. But like I said, Ethan, I do think it's worth monitoring, just because of the common thread between a lot of these teams that have, quote unquote, given the Cavs problems. And it's hard to say that again because they're the best team in the NBA. But I think we've gotten to the point here in the regular season where we're starting to look a little bit deeper, a little bit further underneath the surface for what could be April, May, June, and what kinds of things to look for when they get to April, May, and June. And I do think length, athleticism, and bigger sized wings, I think that's something to continue to monitor.
I agree. And it's like you said, it's mostly because of the size of these players or the wingspan of these players. Because we talk about OKC, it has the top defense, and they're physical, and that's what the Cavs knew that they had to match, the physicality. But strength isn't a problem for the Cavs. It's getting around players that are just simply in the way and are in passing lanes. That was one of the different problems that we saw today, was that guards that were trying to make passes that they would normally make would being tipped up or
Right.
tipped around, and it wasn't easy as it had been in the past for them to make some of these entry passes to the bigs and all those different things. And I think it's definitely, like you said, something that's worth monitoring. But also, when you talk about going forward and looking at the schedule and what's coming up, Chris, 13 of the next 17 games are against teams with a record of 500 or better.
Mm-hmm.
And these are some of the opponents that you are going to want to watch, because most of them are potential playoff teams, obviously, but also because of what they can do on the defensive end. Indiana, of course, playing them again. Kenny Atkinson and Rick Carlisle both said that this is like a little playoff series. You get to see how they can make adjustments. And I think potentially having Ty Jerome back for the game on Tuesday will be a big difference, because Ty Jerome is a guy that is known to be steady and has been able to not be dictated because of the speed of what the defense is wanting to do. Darius Garland said it after today's game. They were trying to speed them up, and they did that because either they were not running the full court press breakout as they wanted to, or Darius said, um, that they might just either want one big to come set a screen, or everybody just get out of the way and let the ball handler bring it up and break the full court press. But I think Ty Jerome is a guy that has been able to do that and has been a calming factor on the offensive end. But again, Indiana, OKC, Minnesota, Phoenix, Houston, and Philly are the next couple of opponents. And I think those are the games that we really want to look forward to because it's a tough stretch and we like tough games for the Cavs.
Yeah, and look, Indiana's not a very good defensive team. They're bottom 10 in the NBA in defense. So there are reasons to think that this was just a blip for the Cavs, and maybe they were caught off guard by the second half adjustment with Ben Shepherd being in the starting lineup instead of Tyrese Halliburton. And then the minutes for Halliburton, an offensive minded player, were given to defensive minded players in Shepherd and in TJ McConnell, who is really, really pesky, who has given the Cavs problems in the past. So, this isn't to say that Indiana is a really good defensive team and the Cavs struggle against really good defensive teams. No, I think it's, the style of player that some of these teams have. And, Phoenix has some long, athletic, quick wings. Ryan Dunn, who's in the starting lineup, is like 6'8" to 6'9" or something like that. Royce O'Neal, Donovan Mitchell's buddy, a guy that the Cavs have had on their radar for the past couple of years. He's somebody who has that kind of skill set as well. Minnesota with Jaden McDaniels and even Anthony Edwards. So Houston, if Tari Eason is healthy, they've got Amen Thompson, they've got Tari Eason, they've got size, they've got length, they've got athleticism on the perimeter. Dylan Brooks included in there as well. So yeah, I do think that this is going to be a fun, interesting stretch for the Cavs just because of the play style that they're going to be going up against and just because of the types of players that they're going to be going up against. And I think they need this. I don't know that they need this in January, in the dog days of the NBA, when everybody's just trying to get to the All-Star break at this point in time. But I do think that they need these kinds of tests. A couple of weeks ago, all of the commentary inside the Cavs locker room privately was like, we keep blowing out all these opponents and we're not getting tested in the fourth quarter and we're not getting to run some of the stuff that we want to do in late game situations and be in those pressure moments and be in those highly competitive games deep into the fourth quarter that are going to be beneficial for us, in the long run. Now they're entering a stretch where they may be in more of those. And how do you handle it? What kinds of things work? What kinds of things don't work? What kinds of things will you have to make adjustments for moving forward? And all those different things. It's informative, if anything else, for the Cavs going through this kind of scheduled gauntlet.
And Chris, I remember when we were trying to map out the season. This was already on our docket when we were trying to break up the toughest stretches of the Cavs season. And obviously to reiterate, it's to end the month, it's Indiana, OKC, Minnesota, Phoenix, Houston, Philadelphia, Houston, Detroit, Miami, Atlanta. And if you really, and it's in Miami, and we understand what that means for the Cavs and how difficult that can be. But when you talk about a stretch of games where maybe two of these teams, you feel like, automatically, like they have an upper hand, they should go in and win and whatever without a problem. The others, you're like, hey, these are Western Conference teams. These are not only 500 teams, they're also at the top of the Western Conference. Philadelphia is like Philadelphia, so whether or not Joel Embiid plays is entirely dependent on how the game will be looked at. And then the Detroit Pistons are then the bottom. Well, not the bottom. They're in the play-in mix right now because of what we talked about with J.B. Bickerstaff and how they're always going to be a defensive-minded team if J.B. Bickerstaff is the coach. But they might have some of the length. Kate Cunningham being the point guard at 6'8", and all those different things. So you mentioned it, and I agree with you. The Cavs needing a stretch like this, not only to test them, but to, and I hate using that word now. They are not being tested. They are the tests, but it's to get information. And that's what I enjoy about talking to Kenny Atkinson is they are trying to constantly make adjustments. He likes being able to rip up plans and go with something that's brand new or wasn't in the game plan because nothing's working. And if something sticks, he puts it in his little briefcase and says, I'll save that for later.
And that's the thing, right? I mean, part of this regular season, because of the buffer that the Cavs have given themselves and because of what kinds of goals they have in mind, ultimately, part of this regular season is experimenting with different things. Um, try different lineups, try different combinations. There was a stretch throughout the course of tonight's game where Kenny Atkinson went with Dean Wade at the 5 again. He went to that small ball Dean Wade at center, surrounded by George Niang and Sam Merrill and some of those other guys. Now, it wasn't the usual lineup that is out there when Dean's at the 5 because, Ty Jerome wasn't available, and that kind of affected Kenny Atkinson staggering Darius and Donovan and some of the lineups that he put Donovan out there with. But those kinds of things, yeah, I mean, they could lead to losses. They could lead to bad stretches, but they're beneficial for the Cavs and they're informative for the Cavs. And as Kenny Atkinson has said, and this organization has said, and it's not just when it comes to how do they manage injuries, but how they navigate this schedule and how they approach games in the regular season may not always be what fans want to hear, but there is a bigger picture in play. And it's just not about January. It wasn't about tonight necessarily. It wasn't about the other night against Toronto. It's not about January. It's not about February. It's about collecting as much information as possible, seeing what works, what doesn't work, seeing who works together, who doesn't work together, so that when the time comes, when it matters the most, they have all of these answers and they don't have to answer them at the time that it's the most important. Look, there are going to be situations that arise in the playoffs that the Cavs are going to use a lineup that, probably doesn't get a whole bunch of run in the regular season, because that's just the way that it goes. Or maybe there's going to be a closing lineup that Kenny goes to just because of the matchup or because of the game flow or because of what he's feeling in that particular moment. But he's trying to do a lot of this stuff in game situations so that when that time arises, he can go back to it and he can feel confident going to it and he can trust what it was that he saw in the regular season when he did go to those things.
And Chris, I think the other thing, in the grand scheme of things, especially when we talk about the trade deadline approaching, I think one of the most important things to take away from today's game is how valuable each player is to this roster. Like,
Mm,
the thing that Kenny Atkinson has always been talking about is finding solutions to problems, not like bringing problems to problems and be like, hey, we're not doing this right. We need to fix this, blah, blah, blah. But
right.
also being able to offer solutions to every problem. And the solution sometimes is a different lineup. We saw it earlier in the season when he put an all bench unit on the
Against
floor
Chicago.
and took out the core four, and it worked, right?
Mm,
And then there's other games where you need a Max Struess game or a Karis LeVert game or a Sam Merrill game. And I said it earlier, but just to reiterate, I think this would have been a Ty Jerome game because of his ability to switch speeds and to be at his own pace without adhering to what the defense is doing. And Rick Carlisle said it before the game. The one of the main differences of this Cavs team is that they're healthy. Like, they haven't dealt with a whole lot of injuries compared to last season. And at this point, they didn't have Evan Mobley. They didn't have Darius Garland last year
mm,
because of their 6-week injuries, right? And I think it's important for Cavs fans to realize that even though this is a bad game, even though Max Strus was a minus 23, even though Dean Wade didn't play that well, even though Karis LeVert didn't do what he needed to, there was another option that simply wasn't available. And there's also been games where these players have come back and been the savior or the unsung hero of the game. So I don't think you can discredit what they've done all year to get to 33-5 by just one game and being a stinker, which they haven't had much of this year.
yeah, it was just a bad game all around. I can't really look at somebody, maybe Evan Mobley, if you try and like push it enough. I can't really look at too many guys and say, they brought it tonight. They played their game tonight. They played well for the Cavs tonight. And you're right. Like the other night against Toronto, they didn't really play all that well either. But Darius saved them. Like Darius had a big part in that, and Evan Mobley for stretches, and Jared Allen for stretches. Like different guys throughout that, like stepped up in moments when they needed. But it was really like a big Darius game. This wasn't a big anybody game, for the Cavs. And yeah, like it is a collective and it is a true team, and they've been able to pride themselves on that level of scoring balance and that level of effectiveness from everybody up and down their lineup. But they just didn't have it tonight. Again, like Evan Mobley, you can make the case because he had a double double, 16 and 12. But Donovan was bad. He missed his first 6 shots. It didn't look like he had a whole bunch of lift. Didn't look like he had a whole bunch of explosiveness. I think that's something worth monitoring. Darius wasn't his efficient self that he has been. You know, he was 50, 40, 90. Tonight, he was under 50% from the field. Max Strus was terrible. Just absolutely awful. Gave the Cavs nothing. Karis LeVert didn't have any kind of game to write home about. As you mentioned, it was a rare night for the Cavs. It was. And I think it's up to them to show that it was just one bad game out of 82 and it was just a blip, and make the corrections that they need to make, have the conversations that they need to have, make the adjustments that they probably need to make from not just this game against Indiana, but what they showed against Toronto a couple of nights ago as well. And as Donovan said, like, don't let this compound, because one loss or two bad performances, because the Toronto game wasn't really that good, two bad performances can't turn into three, and then three can't turn into four. That's the thing that they've been able to avoid this year, just like they've avoided the stinker for the most part until tonight. They've also avoided, compounding these errors that pop up. And I think they've earned the benefit of the doubt. And I have no doubt, based on what I've seen from this team, that they're going to give a much more focused and a much better effort on Tuesday against the Pacers.
And that's the other thing you kind of like about getting to play the same team again in a couple of days. Like, you have
Mm-hmm.
all of the information, and again, you might have Ty, you might not, depending on his illness. But like, I feel like the Cavs and Kenny Atkinson and his staff relish the opportunity to make adjustments and see what is going to work, especially when this is a potential team that you face in the playoffs. They're, I believe, the 6th or 7th seed right now. So
They're
like,
on a roll. They might be
yeah,
4 now at this point.
that, yeah, maybe, but I think they've won 6
5.
straight.
5 because the Magic won tonight.
Right,
So
so
yeah,
they're
they're
on
right
a,
there.
yeah, they're on a 6 game win streak and all that other stuff. I just think, like, being able to take another look at the film and what they were able to do, and obviously it's a different game if Tyrese Halliburton stays in. So all
Yeah.
those things need to be taken into account. But I want to touch on what you mentioned with Donovan, because we did the latest episode yesterday on whether there is concern about his injury. And throughout the first half, Donovan did not look like himself. And then the second half, he looked like a better, I guess, like, but not like all the way there. And obviously, stars have bad games, stars have bad stretches, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that made me look a little bit closer was how he was getting up and down the floor. And
Yeah.
especially on the offensive end, where Kenny Atkinson and Darius Garland, especially, have harped on trying to make, even in jokes, trying to make Donovan run to the corners. There was a specific play where Max Strus, I believe it was, and Karis LeVert were shooting down each side on the opposite sides, and Donovan was kind of just lollygagging, was in the middle of the lane, like on the way in the pathway of where they were going, and like, that's a no for what this transition offense is trying to do. And you
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't think that the star and someone who was so hard on consistency and habits would have a slip up like that. It caught Darius Garland by surprise, because he was trying to get into an action and Donovan was simply in the way.
Yep. Again, I think when the Cavs lose, like I think we always have to put it in perspective. And like when guys play poorly, like we always have to put it in perspective. And I know people probably get sick of me saying this, but it's just, you observe these things and you keep watching. You keep watching to see if it continues, right? You don't want to sit here and say it's nothing, but you also don't want to blow it out of proportion. You just continue to monitor it. And that's kind of where I'm at with Donovan. Um, a couple of nights ago against Oklahoma City, Lou Dort is awesome. Lou Dort is one of the premier defenders in the NBA. He is probably going to be on one of my two NBA all defensive teams. What he did to Donovan the other night, where Donovan went 3 of 16 from the field, Dort does that to a lot of guys, a lot of star players too. You know what I mean? And I think history has shown that Dort is somebody who has a tendency to bother Donovan. So let's continue to monitor that. Let's see what happens Thursday night when the two teams play again. But, for Donovan, it felt like this was an opportunity for an explosion game. He was coming off a night where he got rested against Toronto. And then there were multiple days to kind of give him an opportunity to recover after that Oklahoma City game. And it was a favorable matchup for him. Indiana doesn't have Lou Dort. They don't have anybody close to the caliber of Lou Dort in terms of defensive capabilities. And you just didn't have that throwback explosive Donovan Mitchell performance. The one reason why I kind of stop short and say, yeah, his knee is bothering him at this point in time, is because if you remember the game before he kind of shut it down last year, he would not go inside the 3-point line. He didn't even try. He just kind of stayed out near the 3-point line, and he clearly wasn't himself. I didn't feel like he was himself tonight, but I also feel like he got some shots that he probably wants back. He did create some space at times, and he just didn't make them. So, I'm a little bit hesitant because it wasn't the same feel that I had last year right before he shut it down. But again, we continue to monitor it. We continue to see how the Cavs manage it. We continue to see what the Cavs do when it comes to his minutes and his workload. And is he going to get extra treatment following games and stuff like that? You know what I mean? The knee was clearly a problem for him last year. It was. And it was something that, coming into this season, there were conversations between Donovan and the organization, Donovan and the coaching staff about how do we manage this the best that we possibly can? How do we keep a lot of stress off of this as best we can during the regular season? So I'm not going overboard. I'm not blowing this out of proportion, but I'm going to continue to monitor it. That's for sure.
Donovan and Evan played 30 minutes tonight, and Darius played 29. And obviously, we watch a lot of different things. I think Chris and I are very good at making sure we're not solely watching the ball like the common fan. And tonight, the thing that I was watching with Donovan the most was how he was being active on defense. And what stood out to me was how many times he got caught under the basket boxing out. And how much energy and exertion goes into your knees when you're trying to box out a 6'9", 6'10", or much bigger person than you, and then also trying to jolt your way up the floor, right? So I definitely think that you have to take that into account. But as much as Kenny wants guys, and especially to group rebound on the offensive end or defensive end in that case, I think you need to let Donovan know, if you don't have a favorable matchup over there, and you're not on the perimeter boxing out, that's not something that we need you doing in January where you could be straining your knee or whatever it is. I definitely think that's something to monitor. And the other thing, which we've known all year long, is how much he's had a ball handler with him on the floor, whether it's been tonight was Karis LeVert or Evan Mobley was more bringing the ball up than he was when Darius Garland was on the bench in his split minutes. And that's something that we talked about going back to last year. And you put this on my radar, Chris, when you were talking about how Donovan likes having a table setter. And Darius is a great guy for that. But last year they didn't have Ty Jerome. Tonight again, they didn't have Ty. And that's a lineup that Kenny likes running, not only because it's a table setter with Donovan, but also the chemistry between Donovan and Ty is sky high.
Right. The other thing is, I brought this up a few days ago. In terms of possessions played at point guard, last year Donovan was right around 60%. And going into tonight's game, it was right around 40%. So it was a significant difference. But you could tell, the Indiana Pacers were kind of like putting pressure on him, trying to make it a little bit difficult for him and the Cavs to get into their offensive actions. And it's not to say that they see weakness with Donovan as a ball handler, but it's a little bit different when he's all of a sudden got to take the inbounds, bring it up the court against pressure, get the team into their offense, run the stuff that they want to run. He has been a big-time beneficiary of not having to play so much point guard this year for the Cavs and not have to carry so much of that offensive burden. But, when Ty Jerome is not available, and Craig Porter Jr., by the way, is under the weather, just like Ty is, the point guard minutes are either Darius or Donovan Mitchell. And, that's not the way that it's been throughout the course of this season. And putting that level of responsibility on Donovan, it changes things. It changes how the Cavs function offensively. It changes their ability to get into their sets. It's a little bit more exhausting when Donovan's getting picked up 94 feet and he's got to bring the ball up the floor and he's got to initiate and finish. It's not making an excuse. Donovan wasn't good tonight, but I think there were circumstances surrounding him not being at his best and the Cavs not being at their best, especially when it came to trying to deal with the defensive pressure on the ball from Indiana. That's not new, by the way. Teams see that as something that they can prey on with the Cavs. It started with Golden State Warriors on the West Coast road trip. Now, it didn't become problematic and it didn't become a big talking point because the Cavs went out to win that game. But in the first half of that game against Golden State, they were kind of caught off guard because Golden State extended their pressure out higher and it took the Cavs a half to adjust to that. They were like, whoa, okay, that's different. They're being really, really physical at the point of the attack. They're picking us up 94 feet. They're extending their defensive pressure. Toronto did it the other night. They don't have as good of defenders, but they're feisty and they're annoying at times, I would assume, to play against. They seem like they would be annoying to play against. So that's something to continue to watch too. One of the ways to take a team out of its offensive flow is not allow them to get into their sets as early as they do. The Cavs have been really, really good in terms of getting into their actions quickly. And that keeps them from having to operate against a short shot clock, end of shot clock situation. Things that they term butter situations or grenades or something along those lines. But if you're working so hard just to bring the ball up the floor or to get across half court or just to get into your sets, that could change the rhythm that you're in offensively. That could change the feel that you have, the flow that you have offensively. So continue to keep an eye on that and how many teams feel like that's one way to disrupt the Cavs on the offensive end of the floor.
Well, Chris, they get to do it all over again on Tuesday, and then they get to play a team that they also recently played on Thursday in the Indiana Pacers and then the Oklahoma City Thunder, respectively. So I think it's going to be a good test. Again, hate using that word now for the Cavs. It's going to be a good opportunity to see where they're at in their adjustments and how the Kenny Atkinson and his staff can make adjustments against teams that they had problems against, because the OKC Thunder game, as many might remember, was not a blowout. So, yeah, it's definitely going to be a fun week, and I know you're going to enjoy yourself traveling, but so you can go get into packing. With that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can send in your questions for our weekly Hey Chris episode. And you can just be interactive with me and Chris on a daily basis. To do so, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around. because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.